Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones. Our guests tonight are Orlando Sanchez, Sean Roberts, and Paul Betancourt. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome, David.
And we also, Gary, as an aside, we have two treasurers here today. Orlando, as everyone knows, is treasurer of Harris County. Paul Betancourt recently has been made treasurer of the Republican Party of Texas.
Yes, so that's good. And I guess Sean Roberts is the treasurer at his law firm.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's hope. There's always hope for Sean.
Sean is the bravest guy on the panel, however, because he just took on an incumbent Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee, and has managed to survive.
I have survived.
How was your first race?
It was interesting. Politics is unlike any other business that I'm aware of, and I'm familiar with a few different businesses. Not quite familiar with people telling you that they're going to do one thing and do another thing, but having the platform and the opportunity to discuss issues, real issues that were important to people in the 18th District that have not been aired out for 15 or 16 years was awesome.
Are you going to vote for Sheila in the fall?
Absolutely.
Well, we all make mistakes. Okay, gentlemen.
Right, he's not going to follow the path of Deborah Medina and say, no, I will not support the incumbent governor of the state of Texas.
Well, but the jury's still out on that one, Paul. Let's talk about primary election winners and losers. This is our first show since the primary, and Orlando first. Who was the big winner in the Texas primary in 2010, in your opinion?
I think the Governor Perry race, everyone was expecting he wouldn't even make. That he'd be in a runoff, and that whether it was going to be second or first place, and he came in without a runoff. So, big winner for the state, for the Republican Party, and for the governor.
Sean, big winner.
Bill White, of course. I don't think anyone really felt like any of his opponents stood a real chance, but when you have somebody spending $10 million of their own money, certainly we think that that was the big race on the Democratic side.
Yeah, but Sean, really, when Frick Shantme spent that $10 million, the objective was not to make Bill White look good, which is what he did with that money. And Bill obviously won in the landslide. The other big winner is not just Governor Perry, but the whole Republican Party. Because, and Gary, you know this, we were given the great gift of not having another month of a knockdown, drag-out battle between an Aggie yell leader and a cheerleader for the same job, the top job in the state of Texas.
My guess is, Paul, you'd probably agree that the loss of Leo Vasquez, who was our tax assessor collector, Hispanic leader in your party, the railroad commissioner who was an Hispanic, who was defeated by a nobody in your party.
Victor Carrillo.
Yes. And, of course, now you're replacing an Hispanic treasurer. Could there be any stronger message to the Hispanic community than we don't need you?
The strongest message we've got for Hispanic voters is sitting right at the table, which is Orlando Sanchez. And since I've been supporting his campaigns for, is it 15 or 20 years?
Since 1992.
And, David, you look at all these numbers, both political parties had an issue with people that were running in office because if you look at Hispanic surnames, there was a 2 out of 14 a success story in the Democratic primary in Harris County and a 1 out of 7 success story in Harris County in the Republican side. The reality is this is a big turnout election. It's a base turnout election. And if one particular group doesn't vote en masse in either political primary, that can hurt candidates, and that's what happened.
I think particularly down ballot candidates. I mean, everybody knows who the mayor is, everybody knows who the governor is, everybody knows the lieutenant governor, but you start getting down to the lower levels, either at the statewide races, such as Railroad Commission, or at the county level, the county treasurer or the county tax assessor collector or the county clerk or the district clerk. I've been around for a while, so I think I have a little more name ID than the other folks, but it's very difficult when you're down ballot.
Well, and Orlando has a better winning percentage than the Astros do when you look at his record over time.
So Mr. Roberts, Mr. Roberts is our only representative of a minority constituency here. Do you think the Republican Party has a problem with minority constituencies, Mr. Sanchez being, an exception to this rule?
I think Orlando represents a minority constituency, but we'll talk about it here. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. As they say, the proof is in the pudding. And sure, I think that the Republican Party has got a lot of work to do between now and November in order to convince Hispanics that they're the right party to carry their flag going forward with the issues that the Hispanic community is having. And certainly in the African American community, there's just a distrust right now, I think, of the Republican Party with the tactics that they've been using with respect to this administration on the national level and with some things that they've been doing.
So, Sean, you're saying
locally.
You have problems with Republicans Republicans opposing President Obama on principle, and somehow that has impact on the African American community? Do you actually think Republicans are opposing him because he's African American?
And I didn't say that.
Good.
But there are African Americans that do feel that way.
Well, but that is
there are
reverse,
non-African Americans that feel that
would
way.
be reverse racism. That would be
Sure.
saying you oppose me on principle, but the real reason is you're a racist. That's just totally garbage. I'm sure you agree with
Well,
me.
I would agree with that, but let's remember that these very same African American voters were blamed for only voting for Obama because he was African American. And so if you're going to make one argument, then you got to be prepared to address the other.
Okay, now, as a survivor from the Republican side of the Obama wave in '08, the reality of this is that there's always many levels to the people's decisions to vote. But the first one's emotional. They're going to vote. In '08, they voted for hope and change. Now, to David's comment, our railroad commissioner actually won in 2004 against an Anglo and then lost against one in 2010. But one of our good Supreme Court justices that happens to be Hispanic won down ballot of him. These races are always more difficult. I don't think we've got that type of issue that you say we have, Sean, but we do have a strong opposition to President Obama on the principle of health care because we really don't want to end up with a single-payer socialized system in the United States, and neither does the public, and that's why his opinion polls are way, way down at this point.
Orlando, let's talk about a wave, another type of wave that could come in November of 2010 and impact your being treasurer any longer, and that would be the wave of Bill White. You know, popular mayor of the city of Houston, now running for governor. How much does he threaten the Republican base vote in Harris County as a result of his popular mayoralty?
Very little. He was able to woo a lot of what I call West Side Republicans on the theory that he would get the city of Houston moving. He promised to build rail in his administration, never built an inch. So there's a record of failure there. And I don't think that the Republicans that are incensed about what's going on in Washington are going to rush out in droves to support Bill White. And with respect to one of the previous questions, it was pointed out that the Republicans have some work to do. I think the Democrats have some work to do. Bill White, for example, had the opportunity to increase the representation by minorities, particularly Hispanics, in the city of Houston when the population reached a certain point, as is mandated by the city charter. He refused to give the tax-paying citizens of Houston a representation on the city council.
You're talking about expanding city council.
That's correct, and it's called for in the charter. He had to be sued, and that suit is still pending. He's going to have to address that issue to the entire statewide Hispanic community, so they have a lot of homework to do.
And your message is to the Hispanic community, fill out that census and send it back?
Oh, I encourage everybody to fill out the census.
I wanted to ask Sean, to give you a chance to say something about Bill White. Bill White's impact here. My analysis was 4 years ago, Bill White was the perfect candidate for governor of Texas for the Democrats because he was at his peak of popularity. The problems that the city is now facing were not apparent at that point. And the Governor Perry, had a third-party candidate he had to deal with. And Chris Bell, as you remember, did so very well that a stronger candidate may have been able to prevail. Well, now it's 4 years later. Why don't you give us your handicap of truly Bill White's chances to win the governorship statewide, and then we'll talk about Harris County.
Yeah, certainly statewide, I think there are going to be some challenges. I thought that David's question initially was, what was the impact going to be on Harris County?
Yes.
And I think the impact on Harris County is going to be similar to the impact that Obama had on Harris County. When you look at what the city of Houston did just in November and December for the mayor's race, for example. So if I were a betting man, and what I've been telling all my friends that are running for judge on both the Democratic and the Republican tickets is the governor's race is obviously going to drive it, and I would be worried if I were a Republican right now. There are a lot of Republicans, friends of mine that supported my campaign, for example, that are not happy with a governor that's talking about succeeding from the Union. They see Rick Perry as an embarrassment, almost as a radical. And a lot of these people, Republican, Democrat, are a little bit more middle of the road than Rick Perry.
Okay, Sean, bad bet this year because 06 was not a great year for Republicans. 08 was a fantastic year, best year in almost in a generation for Democrats. And 010 is a bad year for Democrats because of the downdraft on the Obama administration policies. Now, remember, his personal popularity is still hanging in there, but the policies are driving Tea Parties across the country. So this is a bad bet by Bill White on his timing. I think, Gary, you're right. He'd have been more formidable in 06. We'll see what happens on a statewide level. But, David, he's going to have to win this race in Harris County by 10 to 12 points to be competitive statewide. He will have to do better than any Democrat did in the Obama year, because the number one vote getter was Sheriff Garcia.
Right.
And he would have to do that good to be able to be competitive in a statewide race.
And the Democrats
and that's
say
not
that-
going to happen.
The Democrats say they need 55% from Bill White in Harris County for them to prevail statewide and on the ballot, down ballot races. But you, Orlando, have to answer this question. Kay Bailey Hutchison, Senator, defeated primary candidate for governor, is not resigning. Mr. Perry is not going to get to pick her replacement, which would have been certainly a boost to the ticket. Is that the signal to moderate voters in the Republican primary? We don't have to participate in that party any longer.
No, I don't think so. I think what's going to drive the voters in November is the activity that's going on in Washington, D.C., the policies that are emanating out of Washington, D.C. And when people start realizing their health care costs and their premiums are actually going to increase, and the fact that almost every federal service is lacking, whether it's the post office, whether it's the Border Patrol, whether it's the IRS, whether any service the government provides is lacking. People are, the feeling is, and there's a tremendous anti-government wave hitting this country. And they're mad. They're mad as hornets, as we say here in Texas. They're going to turn out.
They're joining militias and just they're going crazy.
Whatever it takes, that's a component, but they're going to turn out,
David,
and it's going to be overwhelming.
You keep looking for this liberal Shangri-La to show up in 2010. It's not going to happen because
it was here in 2008.
It was here in 2008. You've just missed the timing. And when an election gets nationalized, like President Obama's in 2008, like the 1994 changeover of the federal Congress, when those happen, they happen, occasionally, and they're top down. And so, really, what Bill White is doing is he's swimming against, the flow, and it's going to take an awful amount of effort to get to 55% in Harris County.
That, and also, to be fair, Sean, the warts are appearing in the city of Houston. I mean, Anise Parker doesn't criticize Bill White by name, but she's criticizing his policies left and right. And number two, the point to be made, Barack Obama running in 2008 was just a very special election, and I do think that Obama did so well because I think the American people were ready to overcome the racist past the country had way back when. Finally, here we have a really smart guy, African American, running for president, and we can vote for him. And I think people felt good about it.
Busted.
Exactly. That was important.
Sean, I don't guess Gary's been watching the Tea Party rallies. Do you think?
Maybe not.
Did he watch the
I got better
people?
things to do with my time.
Did he watch the people who spat on
Dave,
African American
what about
congressmen?
Representative Eric Cantor getting a bullet through his office, and he's a Republican in Virginia, and happens to be Jewish like Gary is. Okay, now come on.
How did the bullet get there, though?
Somebody
they shot it up in the air.
Well, it doesn't
and it
matter.
landed
Okay,
on his window.
it's a random act of violence. Okay, so the bottom line is that these happen in political campaigns. They've happened for hundreds of years. The fact of the matter is, Orlando's right. The conservative base is fired up. They want to change, and as a result, the House will probably switch from Republican to Democrat.
But I think the question, Orlando, and I'll ask for you and I want Sean's comments, what is it going to take to get the Republican vote out in November, and then what is it going to take for the Democrats to be excited in November?
Well, it's going to take a vision by the Republican Party, which, as of today, they haven't done. They need to articulate a plan, and that plan needs to address the issues that people are concerned about. It's still shocking to me that everyone is talking about health care when the number one issue is the economy and jobs. And so the Republicans, I think, are wasting time by playing around with this game about, look, if they win the majority and they want to repeal it, fine. But if I were a Republican running for national office, I'd be focused on jobs, I'd be focused on the economy, and I'd be focused on how to put more hard-earned dollars into the taxpayers' pockets.
Bill White is going to have a field day with Governor Perry on an issue that is intimately tied to the economy, and that's education. We rank almost dead last in the nation in education, and I'm not quite sure how Governor Perry during the next 6 months is going to be able to defend that. Unfortunately, I think his message is going to be one of dirt as opposed to the plan that Mr. Sanchez is talking about. And, I was an early supporter of Bill White when he had 3% name recognition in the mayor's race that he ran against Mr. Turner and Mr. Sanchez. He's a very astute politician. He knows what he's doing, and I think that he is going to be able to talk about issues that people in Texas care about, and trust me, there's going to be some crossover vote.
Let me just add something real quick, Paul, and that is that I forgot the point I was going to make.
Well, here, let me go for a second. Now, let me tell you that Bill White is an astute politician. There's no question. But Governor Perry is one of the most astute campaigners ever in the state's history. No one else has held the job as long as he's had.
Yep.
Okay. Now, and when you look at that, because there's always issues on either side. You say it's education for Bill White. Well, maybe it's the fact that he spent $250 million bond proceed dollars in the general fund when those were bond issues that were sent, and now that money's gone. Now, so there's going to be, as usual, all the political, hay is going to be made about this. But bottom line, Texas is still a red state. It's a Republican state by about 7, 8, 9, 10 points, no matter what.
Yeah, here's the point I wanted to make. And we talk about Bill White making education the number one issue and that Texas ranks near the bottom. But let me just also say that it is extremely difficult when you're a southwestern state like Texas and it has an inordinate number of undocumented aliens that flow in here because the federal government refuses to secure the border. Those undocumented children who have tremendous needs are in our public education system. And when people say we rank dead last, well, it would help to elevate the quality of the students that are coming out of the public education system if the federal government got their house in order and secured our border.
All right, Orlando, a follow-up question, a little different. Harris County's budget. Economy's tough. Government revenues are down everywhere. Is Harris County dealing with the budget crisis in an appropriate way?
Having served on the city council for 6 years and overseen those disastrous budgets under the Lee Brown administration, I think I'm extremely impressed with the way that Harris County generally runs. We have a tremendous credit rating. Anytime we need to issue debt, we have AAA rating. The Toll Road Authority is doing extremely well. If it was a business enterprise, people would be buying stock and it'd be driven through the roof. We've adjusted this annual budget, and in fact, we just had Commissioners Court impose a hiring freeze, and they took our budgets that we had submitted and whittled those back down. So you've seen the Department of Education, Department of Health, even in my own department, as small it is, I've lost 10% of my employees. And the only department that the Commissioners Court has given any leeway to is the Sheriff's Department for Public Safety. But I've got to say that I'm fairly impressed with the way that the county, are they the best in the nation? I don't know, but I bet you we're pretty close.
Do we have any local issues, Sean, that you think can penetrate the national noise that Mr. Betancourt is hoping continues? The anti-Obama noise of the Tea Party folks. I mean, are there local issues that you think the Democrats can use?
Sure. Immigration. And Orlando just spoke to it. I'm not sure whether or not this Congress is going to have immigration teed up before November, but there were intimations just last month that immigration was soon to follow. And I think that once we get through the financial reform package, the lingering issue in D.C. and what's certainly a local issue, may be one of the reasons that Hispanic turnout has been lower than expected, is that issue. So I think we're going to hear a lot about that from a lot of the Democratic
and you can count on Paul,
candidates.
of course, to continue the hot rhetoric about the invasion and the loss of Hispanics and our loss of.
As usual,
are we
stop
losing
chasing
sovereignty?
rabbits here.
Is it on a daily
the
basis?
bottom line is this: is that Sean made a good point. Hispanic turnout was down in both the Democrat and the Republican primaries. Okay, so that tells you that you don't have an engaged populace from that specific group. Now, to also make a point with what Sean's going is that you never count President Obama out, because just recently you'll see, now we're drilling, or we're going to look at offshore, exploration, and really it's going to be effectively, they're going to do some, seismic soundings. But, he has learned that you are best as a president when you are a moving target and you keep moving on issues.
So my guess is that what you're suggesting, Paul, which I agree with, is that you have a reason to be fearful about November, because now we have a newly energized chief executive who has recently passed the most important piece of domestic legislation since 1965, has concluded a treaty with the Russians, is drilling offshore to show that he's
Is there a question
interested there,
David?
and has put a Hispanic on the Supreme Court. If he is out there from now till November, you should be worried.
Let me just say that the average hardworking, unemployed person from Detroit, Michigan, where unemployment is almost approaching 25%, could care less about a treaty signed with the Russians. What those people are worried about is how to put food on the table and provide education for their children and jobs.
Jobs, David. That's what this election is about. That's why it's a nationalized federal election. People are scared of the direction of the country. They're worried about their employment. They're worried about the debt their second and third generations, their kids and their grandkids are going to have to pay. And that's why the Tea Parties have been fired up. They'll stay fired up until there is an answer. There is none yet from the Obama administration.
Sean, question. They just say it's a nationalized election. However, can local political personalities penetrate? For example, one Democratic judge, Kevin Fine, declared the death penalty unconstitutional in a trial case. Obviously, the death penalty is very popular in Texas, and I don't think the voters, Democrats or Republicans for the most part, don't want to see their district judges declaring state law unconstitutional.
Sure.
So how does this kind of stupid decision impact fall elections?
Well, I think that he and others realized that there was a mistake that was made. He backtracked, Judge Fine backtracked, I think, in less than 24 hours. So I'm not sure who he received phone calls from, but I don't think that that's going to be a driving issue at all. Let me tell you what I think.
Wait a minute, Sean. Bill White was one because he also would not support that when David and I interviewed him.
Okay.
Okay. That's my guess. I'm joking.
But let's talk about these Tea Parties for a second.
Go ahead.
Okay. Because one of the very interesting issues that I see is, especially with these militias, something I was hearing about on television the other day, is how many of these people in these militias are actually receiving federal entitlements, i.e., unemployment benefits. And so on the one hand, you've got the, and I don't call them militias, I call them terrorists because they fit the definition of the United States term terrorist under U.S. law. And that's, I think, what needs to happen with respect to these militias. They need to be called what they are. Now, you can't have it both ways.
Okay, now,
you
Sean,
can't rail against the government.
This, I just listened to this, that a Tea Party member is a militia member and a militia member is a terrorist. So that means all Tea Party members are terrorists? Is that what you're trying to say?
I don't speak in absolutes, Paul, okay. but I will say this. Anybody that is out there talking about overthrowing the government, people who are throwing bricks through people's windows, people who are firing guns through congressmen's windows, people who are threatening the lives of their U.S. representatives, at the end of the day, if they were wearing turbans, if they spoke another language, we would call them terrorists. Okay, we need to call these people what they are. But that's not what
Tea Party members are, Sean. And if you think that, you've gravely mistaken. These are average people that are very concerned about what's happening with their government. They take the Tea Party from the 1773 Tea Party in Boston as their mantra. They're concerned about big government, and that's the bottom line. They're not anything like the terrorists that you're describing.
The polling data, Mr. Sanchez, too, suggests that 77% of them supported the last Republican candidate for President, John McCain. The hate-filled rhetoric was there at the Palin rallies, and they're still continuing. So, I mean, this is not a new group of people.
I've attended Palin rallies. I've seen most of them on television, and I cannot disagree more with you than that she utters hate-filled speech. If you could give me one example, I mean, I'd be happy to listen to it, but I just don't think that's correct.
Maybe it's the new travel show she's going to be doing about Alaska.
Perhaps, but none of her public speeches, as raucous as they may be, have ever espoused any hatred towards any particular group. Now, there's a lot of disenchantment with the leadership in the country, but listen, folks, public discourse has been heated when times have been tough in this country, whether it's we're going to war, whether we're in a depression, or whether we're in a recession. This is nothing different, and we'll work through it. And I, believe me, served in the U.S. military to defend people's right to say what they want to say.
This is what's so disingenuous about this Tea Party. Where were they for the last 8 years when the government was growing out of control? spending money out of control without budgeting
Well, I
for
can
it.
tell you,
I can tell you,
what
I'm
they
going to
were.
answer
They
this
threw the
one.
Republicans out.
They did in
That's
2006.
exactly what happened.
They threw the Republicans
Okay.
out. They stayed home because
In
they were
2008,
they were very
they
concerned.
voted for Obama.
They were very concerned about the policies of the Bush administration on federal spending.
They just did it in stealth
No,
back in
sir.
2008.
I've been on radio for almost 10 years as either a guest or a host.
And you know what?
And
Yeah,
they
you can hear him on the radio
Every
today
Friday.
and every Friday. But you
Right,
know,
from
for
4 to
today,
6, right.
that
We're-
will have-
we're already off the
That'll
ship.
have to be the end of the show. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Betancourt, Sean Roberts, Orlando Sanchez.
Time flies.
It was great fun having you here. So you can do a follow-up of tonight's show by going to HoustonPBS.org and look at Red, White, and Blue at that site. So check that out. And until next time, get informed and get active.